Hey everybody, welcome back to the Resilient Purpose Podcast. Today I'm really excited to bring an episode to you with Steve Graner. He is a longtime educator. He is currently retired as an educator, but of course he is still helping others in terms of education in the education field as the project director for the neurosequential model of education. You guys hear me talk about Dr. Bruce Perry's work and in the neurosequential model and just understanding how the brain affects us in terms of learning and development and overall functioning. And I get to have a really wonderful conversation with Steve to talk about the neurosequential model of education, lessons he's learned in bringing neurosequential model to his community, and we get to talk about a community-wide approach to the neurosequential model, which is really exciting. But then also just kind of talk about different challenges that we all face in trying to help and bring our community to a healthier place. So I promise you will enjoy. I would love to hear any feedback you guys have about this episode because it's a passion of mine to talk about the neurosequential model. So enjoy. My hope for today, and people that watch our podcast have certainly heard me talk about Bruce Perry's work and the neurosequential model and things and all sorts of neuroscience type stuff that I've learned from all the work that you guys are doing. So what I thought I was curious
that we are doing, my friend,
Yes,
we are doing.
You were very kind. Thank you. The thing that really interests me that I wanted to get started was I was curious as to when Dr. Perry's work or the neurosequential model entered into your career as a teacher, educator, helper. Was it right from the start? Did it kind of enter in at a particular pivotal moment in your career, or what's kind of the story behind that?
Oh, that is a great question. And how I wish it had entered into my teaching career early.
Right.
That did not happen. Now, you understand, and your listeners can understand, that I've been a friend of Dr. Perry since I was 12. We went to middle school together. We went to high school together. We ran track and played other sports together. So we have a long time relationship. And given that we in a close relationship, so I did know some of what he was doing. Mm-hmm. But I want to be honest, I was not applying it to my classroom. I didn't know how. Personally, I didn't know enough. I would go hear him speak. I'm his friend. I'm going to, or I would go visit him in the rare chances I could, we grew up in Bismarck, North Dakota together. So in the rare chances he was home, maybe visiting parents, I would drive to go see him. We'd spend time, and I was learning little by little. But then he came to Minot, where I was teaching, and did a full day seminar, mostly for therapists. So as you well know, mostly for NMT.
Right.
And the neurosequential model of therapeutics was first, the first mission of Dr. Perry. And so that's what that meeting was geared toward, except I'm listening as an educator.
Okay.
And I'm going, wait a second. I don't know. This is more than I know, but I really need to know this.
Right.
And so do other educators. And so I did what no one else could do because I'm his friend. I take him home after the big meeting and hopefully just to have coffee and spend a half an hour. And he stayed for 3 hours, Doug. And we talked around that table, didn't even feed him. All we did was drink coffee for 3 hours and talk. And that's really where we hatched the idea that this model and he knew it, but he needed a vehicle. I guess that was me. We're going to do this. We're going to do this in education because we absolutely don't understand neurodevelopment like we should.
Sure.
And so to answer your very first question, I was in my 28th or 29th year of teaching at that point, and I'm going, why didn't I know this before?
Yeah.
That's the intersection.
Was there anything, I don't know if you can kind of reflect on that moment when you were hearing him speak at your school or in your community. Was there something that really about what he was talking about that kind of struck a chord, or oh my gosh, this is something. I mean, I would assume there was elements of maybe I was doing it wrong, or maybe I was missing out on a lot of opportunity because I wasn't thinking about these things. Or was there any particular concept that really kind of stuck out to you and kind of got your brain working?
Oh, you ask such good questions. You're making this easy for me. Well, and you well know this, and maybe several of your listeners do too, but when he showed the model of the brain as a model that contains sort of four, not distinct, but four clear systems.
Yeah.
And understanding that the brain, listen, all I thought the brain was just one big thinking cortex. That's really what I thought. I knew nothing of the sequential nature of brain development, or really how I just didn't really understand how the brain developed I didn't understand any of that.
Sure.
So I'm watching this thinking, I don't understand half of what I need to about the brain, but what I particularly don't understand is this cortex is only efficient and working well that I need as a teacher if the other parts of the brain, the lower systems in the brain are satisfied and to use the word we always use, are regulated, that the levels of stress entering into any learner's life have to be modified and cared about. And so I'm now understanding I have to pay attention to all parts of the brain, not just the cortex. So that's the first aha. Yeah, holy cow, I didn't know this.
Did you get kind of like an insight going, I'm guessing that maybe when I struggle with this kid, or I notice that my fellow teachers are struggling with this group of kids, that now it's all starting to kind of make sense about why it's not working.
Yeah, what exactly? When I understood that their early life experiences were sort of stored and when new life experiences would come into their life, low in the brain, up, as we talk about, kind of from the outside world up through the brainstem, I didn't realize that their early life experiences were filters for what they were now receiving and understanding. So in other words, if you're in my class and you've had a horrible morning, and maybe you come from a really sort of splintered family, or things that are rough, I did not realize I can't get to the best part of your brain, the learning part of your brain, until I take the steps to regulate these lower parts of your brain that are affected by all of your life experiences. So I learned to respect sort of the biology of the brain and the biology of the way my kids were functioning. And I had to consider that first. You hinted at it. Yeah. I had to think of that first, because I wasn't thinking of that first. I was thinking either you get it straight from my cortex, your cortex, or I'm going to punish you for not getting it. Right. And that was a game changer.
Well, and we often, and I think one of the biggest struggles that I see, especially, and I get the pleasure of being able to teach this to different school districts, different, professionals, helpers, and all that stuff. And one of the things that I notice is that we often think that when we tell people or communicate to people what they need to do better or what they're doing wrong and have to fix, that they're automatically receptive to it. And if they don't follow what we tell them, then they're just choosing not to, or they're just being difficult and refusing. And it's like this intentional thing. But when I was learning about kind of this sequential way, although I kind of knew through my years of experience that these weren't intentional, these kids that are just wanting to be bad, but that now it's making sense why. Like when I'm trying to talk to a kid about what they need to do better when they're completely dysregulated, yeah, now I'm understanding why it's not working. Whereas before I'm going, I don't know what to do differently, but I know this isn't working.
Yeah, and I especially felt that, Doug, and I think a lot of educators will relate to this, the hyperarousal kind of wild child experience you might have those are actually the easier kids for me to manage and understand. I mean, I could get them. They were very obvious about their needs.
Yeah.
But what I was missing was our brains, you know, when it comes to how our brain responds to stress.
Yeah.
I was missing sort of the dissociative escape type of mechanism that also exists in our brains that kids were doing, and I was not seeing those kids.
Right.
And that was another aha moment as I sat and listened to Bruce and going, wow, there's a whole raft of kids that I've missed because they were quiet, because they were compliant, because they weren't hassling me in my own selfish way. I just said they're okay. And they weren't okay.
Yeah, and we have these kind of false assumptions, even if they're not disrupting, that they've figured it out, or that they're learning, or they're developed, you know, and that's kind of really a challenge, is how do we kind of recognize, or how do we figure those kids, you know, like how do we get to those kids, or how do we recognize that the kids aren't actually listening because they're shutting down, or their brain's kind of checking out because of whatever stress, and being able to connect to those kids. Because I do hear that feedback a lot. I love the kids that tell you to F off and throw things at you, because they're giving me something. But those kids that shut down and avoid don't give you that information. So it does require us to engage those students in a way that you can kind of figure that out.
Yeah, that was a huge difference maker for me, Doug. In fact, I remember after I had really done more of this training, having a student who appeared very disengaged, really a dark countenance about her, but she had a lot of reasons for it. She was came into my class after a couple months of school, so she came in late. She was dark countenance. She was in a wheelchair. She had just suffered a diabetic coma and had come out of that, and at the same time had just changed foster homes. Now, previously, I would not have understood any of that. But because I knew what to look for, you know, I looked for other hints from her, silent hints. I looked at her handwriting, and I looked at her answers on a typical worksheet. I just watched her body language. I worked on relational, you know, we worked on getting her a couple solid relationships to help build her self-confidence. And it made all the difference in the world, because I understood, you know, the basics of this model.
Kind of thinking about the neurosequential model and in the education system, how does and I think maybe thinking about your integration of NME into maybe your school district or the school districts that you work with, how do you see a school system? What are things that align? What do the NME align with the way school systems currently operate? And maybe where do they clash? Like what are some of the things that they butt up against each other and makes it really hard to kind of get teachers to kind of get that aha moment or implement? Like you said in the beginning, it's how do you implement it, or how it's hard to kind of do those things.
Yeah, well, you know, what we've discovered, Doug, and this is a little indirect answer to your question, but I think it's important to bring it up, is we really need to take a staff first approach when we're implementing the ideas of the neurosequential model. We don't need to take a kid first approach. We need to take a community first approach. So if we can create a more, and I always use the words therapeutic community amongst staff, and I mean all staff, I mean kitchen staff, I mean janitorial staff, everybody. If we can start there, it is always our best way forward. In other words, look at this model of how the brain works, how the brain responds to stress, but let's apply it to us. Let's apply it to our needs first as a community, as a staff. That is first. And then we know that we can transfer it and we can get it into the hearts and minds and the experiences of our kids, right? Where it clashes most often is with a sort of a heavy behaviorist discipline approach, where we have been taught to use sort of rewards consequences type of approach to all discipline. What we learned rather quickly is we could get compliance that way. We could use power and we could force our kids to comply or be kicked out, right? We have all that power. But what we were finding out is that power was the wrong answer for kids who have suffered, especially from early childhood adversity. All that power does is remind them that there are cruel and hard and heavy-handed adults. And they wouldn't get more regulated or more ready to learn. They would become less ready to learn. Now they'd become quiet and they would quit interrupting, and we could shut them out. But we really shut them out, right? We did not provide access to the learning part of their brain, which was morally wrong. So I think that is a quick pushback, and believe me, I understand it. As a teacher, you want to feel safe. You want to feel in control. This isn't about not feeling in control, but it's taking a different approach, a more relational approach, and as we've talked, a more regulation-based approach to getting kids into the right frame for learning, which is different than the compliance-based approach, which creates quiet but not skill.
Well, and I think that you don't want to feel out of control, but I think we can't be in a process where we're trying to feel in control by controlling others.
Yes.
Like the more I try to control other people, the more out of control I will feel, because no one likes to be controlled. I mean, today's society with COVID is a testament to that. When we try to control people are going to push back. They're going to fight back because no one wants to feel controlled. So the only way, and I like kind of that staff-based approach or community-based approach, is the best way to transform a system in the way that's going to give you the greatest outcome is, do I have well-regulated, well-supported teachers and staff?
Exactly.
Because that's the thing. I mean, anytime we've done trauma-informed schools or, doing the greatest thing is like, when am I going to have time to do this? And so every time I hear that is okay. I'm hearing not a very well-resourced school, but I'm also hearing policies that don't allow that flexibility to do that. So even in kind of like the discipline structure, one of the problems in transforming that is like, okay, I want to take this developmentally responsive approach to this kid's challenging behavior, but the Safe Schools Act says you have to suspend the kid for 3 days because he did this. He threatened somebody. Even though we know that we send him home for 3 days, no learning's occurring. We're not able to build, we're actually probably ruining our relationship with that kid. And we're also missing out on the opportunity to make real progress by problem solving and working on this issue with this child.
And all of that belies the word patience, doesn't it, Doug? And that's the kind of the second, I don't know if I want to call it pushback, but I would call it a hurdle to get over.
Yeah.
Is schools are hurting. I acknowledge every educator out there who's hurting and struggling, and it's tough. Toughest 2 years I can remember in education. Yep. So we are, I acknowledge that in every way. And that kind of goes back to what we were talking about. That's why we need to build the community. Mm-hmm. That's why we need to put in place the structures that allow us to understand these kids and not make this all compliance based, but make it skill based as we go forward. I go ahead.
How would you define that community? I wanted to kind of, because you keep mentioning community, I wanted to kind of maybe define what is that community include. Are you talking like parents as well, families of the school district, or kind of just that school itself community, or how do you kind of define all that?
Yeah, that really such a good question. And I believe, I got to experience this firsthand as a school that went through a flood and lost our school and had our school destroyed. And this was after our training with Dr. Perry. So really what we decided to do that happened in the summer. So Doug, what we decided to do, we focused on us as a staff first.
Yeah.
And part of that was very organic as we cleaned each other's homes and we got each other prepared for the school year. But we made a concerted effort to create this family atmosphere. And what we made sure we didn't lose, even in all of the chaos of our life, is we didn't lose our rituals. So part of this building of community is having and maintaining rituals. And celebrating small wins and celebrating birthdays and grieving with others in funerals. And all of that became a really central push for our staff development, is that we need to, and it was very, like I said, it was very organic. But like the pandemic, what could be harder? It is the time that you come together in a circle and you say, we're starting with us first. And then that leaked out to the kids and the families in a pretty effective way. Again, not explicit so much as an implicit in the way it went out to people very organically. And kids came to school and felt safe and they felt cared for. Yeah. Because our staff felt safe and cared for on the outside.
Well, and there's comfort in that ritual, and we always talk about crisis as opportunity. So, that crisis, although devastating, provided an opportunity to kind of really transform and come together. There's a lot, trauma doesn't always have to have negative outcomes. They can transform into positive outcomes if we handle it right.
Honestly, Doug, I don't think we get to positive, great outcomes without suffering. I just think that's part of the process. And I learned that firsthand, being, directly involved in a school that was responding to a crisis. Now I listen as people are going through it in the current situation with the pandemic, and the answer is still the same. We need to get back to caring for each other first. And we don't all have to agree on everything. We just need to really care and build each other up so we're prepared to bring in these. Then we're prepared to help the kids. And we not only taught the neurosequential model to our staff, but that year we were eventually able to teach it to our kids as well. So we all spoke kind of the language of regulation and we spoke the language of recovery together. And maybe it will help everyone to know that, by the way, in the long run, not at the beginning, but in the long run, we covered as much academic content as we did the previous year. And
that is kind of a common challenge. Was there any adjustments or modifications, or in terms of kind of like how academic content was experienced for students compared to previously?
Yeah, indeed. And we were told by our principal that you will take a long runway into this year, and academics are not going to be the highest priority, but the wellness of your kids and us is going to be our highest priority. And eventually we'll get back to solid everyday teaching. But in the meantime, we modified our teaching a bit. And we would give more movement breaks and more mindfulness breaks, and probably would teach, for me in particular, I would teach 20 minutes at a time, and then maybe do a little bit of yoga. And then I would teach 20 minutes and we might take a walk. We were infusing those rest periods, especially early on in the process, and that paid dividends for later. And I would say later in the year, I was able to teach very normally, even though I kept those brain breaks alive.
Right.
And used more music, I used more movement, I used more of what I learned through the model, but I was able to cover the ground I needed to cover, or what someone thought I needed to cover. I was able to cover skills for the kids, and it turned out just fine.
Well, my wife's a teacher, and your comments made me think of this. so, I've been with her for 12 years. And so, for most of her teaching career, I've been alongside of her. And, the funny thing is even though I'm not directly in the education, the same thing happens every year. By like January or February, students and teachers are exhausted about the academic content. Like there's this plateau because you put so much of an emphasis on academics from day one all the way to the end. By the time you hit to January, no kid wants to learn anymore. It's kind of that, what Dr. Perry talks about, like there's just a 6-month refractory period because we've activated that cortex or tried to so much that there's no real learning that happens from February to May because people are just exhausted. They're just done. But if you instituted, like, what if we spread the academic learning out farther and inputted those regulatory breaks or those spaces and things like that, you could have some real learning that occurs in March. I don't know if that's something similar that you guys experienced out in Minnesota.
That is how I experienced it. And it was actually my last year of teaching, but I was not exhausted at the end of that year from teaching. I felt like I got to do everything I really wanted to do. But I loved having the permission early on to institute the breaks that I never let go of. Yeah. So and the kind of the second outcome of that, doing the regulatory breaks, and I wasn't the only teacher doing it. We had done training with much of our staff, so we had this common understanding. So Dr. Perry said, well, given all you guys have been through, you certainly will expect that critical incidents will be much higher, and just expect it and understand that, we're kind of saying the same thing to some of our pandemic schools right now too, aren't we? It's just know it's going to be harder, and it's generally true. But for us, it didn't work out that way. We had less critical incidents that year after the flood and the catastrophe we went through than we had in the previous years where everything was normal. So the fact that we had instituted a respect kind of for the biology of how the brain works made both behavior and learning be better than we expected they could be.
Now, do you just think because the neuroscience friendly approach and just good fidelity or fidelity to the neurosequential model and implementing those things that you're learning, do you think it just kids maybe kind of just responded to it and surprised you, or do you think it had a lot to do with kind of the crisis, kind of everybody, not only did the kids experience the crisis of the flood or everything like that, but everybody did, and so then you kind of had a common collective come together because we are all experiencing it. It's not just the kids are experiencing it, but everybody's experiencing it, so we almost like embraced this together, even though the kids probably didn't really have an explicit understanding that that's what was happening.
I think it really was it's a lot of what you just said. I think that communal understanding and the common suffering that everybody had been through really opened up the channels of empathy that might not have been there. And then, of course, we understood neurobiologically, we understood what that's doing. So there was this nice balance between this human-centered, let's care for each other, but also science-centered, let's understand the mechanisms that are going on inside of all of us. It just made for community building that was powerful. And I'll never forget, like I said, it was my last year of teaching, and the level of community, I'm 11 years later, there's still many of my best friends, right? We're a tight group. Most of us retired now, but we're a tight group. Right.
Well, and I'm just curious. I mean, maybe I think, what you're doing now in your life in terms of the mentorship and the teaching that you're doing with NME and all the effort you're doing, if you didn't have that monumental moment, I would imagine your life would be in a different place, or you might be experiencing life a little differently. Not necessarily a great difference, but your life is kind of probably gone down this road because of how powerful that crisis was for you in terms of where you were.
I think clearly you again you hit the nail on the head there exactly. That is how I experienced it. That crisis has taught me a lot and has allowed me especially to share with people in this pandemic, because there's a lot of parallels, including the wearing of masks.
Oh, really? Did you? Yeah.
We did it for you know, now we do it for transmission. There we did it for pure smell. It was so horrible.
Right.
But I mean, it was this feeling though, Doug, at that time that we're having right now. And the feeling was life will never be the same again.
No.
It will never be the same. We're not going back to something. And we clearly weren't, right? We weren't going back to our school. That's gone.
Right.
We weren't going back to anything normal. So we kind of built a new normal. Mm-hmm. And that new normal took into account the neuroscience. And I think it better prepared us for the years ahead when we didn't have catastrophe. It just better prepared us for all years that followed that time. And it prepared me to move into this job, because for one thing, I had to move. I had to leave my community. I had to go through a real lonely sort of time. But all of those experiences were very helpful, you know, kind of forged in fire, life-changing experiences that have made a difference in what I get to share with people now. So you're right. We made the best of it. What I tell people a lot of times, I said, don't waste your suffering.
Right.
You're going to suffer. That's life.
Yeah.
So don't learn from it. Don't waste it. Let it forge something better.
Well, and you probably didn't necessarily always recognize that in the middle of the muck, in the middle of the yuck. It was afterwards, as you kind of persevered and pushed through and supported each other to kind of to get through that. And I think that this is, you know, I don't know, maybe because of the globalness of the crisis, it feels very yucky in a lot of ways, and you definitely hope to have that wisdom afterwards. But I think it's a weird kind of crisis. I would say maybe that the difference is that with your crisis is, I don't know, maybe for the size of the community compared to the world or whatever. It sounds like, was there divisiveness? I mean, I know we're getting kind of off track of NME, but I'm curious, was there divisiveness in terms of how to handle that crisis in your community? Or was it more come together, we're all in this together, we're going to rise together to get
Yeah,
through?
there was much more of that, because there wasn't anything particularly controversial about how you respond to a flood, like how we respond to a pandemic is caused controversy. So I think it was more of a whole community coming together. It had to be really, there was 11,000 people displaced.
Yeah.
And there were less than 100 people who ever went to a shelter. So that would tell you that this community will wrap its arms around those in need and will take care of them, at least their basic needs.
So no one questioned the scientific effectiveness of the mask in preventing the smell, or?
Yeah, no, there was no.
Everybody's like, no, we definitely need that. So to get back on track with NME and a neurosequential model, we describe it as a developmentally sensitive model. And just for people listening, how would you describe being developmentally sensitive? Because I think that's a critical piece in the neurosequential model in terms of how we define development, or how we view development, or how we use development to help us teach more effectively, help more effectively.
Yeah, and I think our standard mantra in the neurosequential model is, know the stage and watch the state.
Yeah.
That became a really important mantra for us, because as teachers, we're pretty good at watching the stage of development. I think we're pretty good at understanding what someone's reading level is and someone's level of mathematics is, and we kind of understand some kids are more mature than others. We kind of get that stage right. What we really needed was an enhanced understanding of the state of being. In other words, the state of stress. that people were under. And when you recognize some of those, as Dr. Perry teaches us, some of those, and he does it in 5 states, and I'm not going to do a lesson on it, but as we think of calm and alert and alarm and things like states that we can be in, that's where we needed to understand ourselves first. Like, listen, I'm in a state of alarm. I'm not in a good place to make decisions. I'm not in a good place to even discipline this child. I need to regulate, get in a better place myself. And so then we understood that same concept for our kids. So I think that was a key thing. This is understanding stage and state, and putting those two things together, and then teaching in a ways that are appropriate to the levels our kids are at. And that's an art. That's an art form, believe me, but it's where we got to go.
One of the things I've started in trying to talk to people, because I do think, like schools are very good these days about differentiated learning, and I'm going to put kids grouped together based on their reading level, based on their mathematic level, and we are very good at that. But I also sometimes think that we always I think our brains gravitate towards developmental level in terms of like my reading level, my cortex development. But we often kind of miss out on like our relational or social development, our physical development, our regulatory functioning development, like talking about core regulation network and our ability to just self-regulate and just be still and calm and be able to take in information. So because I think of like a kid who will say, oh, this kid has ADHD, they're completely dysregulated all the time, they can't pay attention, still focus, so I'm just going to keep giving them same cortex oriented intervention, and then they get kind of like, well, it's not working, so we need to give them a medication, when we're missing. I think what's one of the things I like about it is finding intervention that matches the part of the brain that really needs its attention, to where we can get that. But I think because it's more than just I'm gonna put these kids grouped together on their reading level and read the appropriate level book. It's I need to know that this kid is gonna need more movement or different way of teaching to them than say the advanced kid who's typically regulated or advanced in their regulation.
And quite often, Doug, we found out that just say we take a break and do a little yoga. Let's say we go for and I had very planned and practiced walks. Yeah. We would go for certain walks. Do you think there was any advanced kids who didn't like that?
Oh, I'm sure they loved it. And I think that sometimes we also kind of mistake that. Like, oh, this kid can tolerate, he can deal with it. We don't think about what they need. We just think, what can they,
So those were, those brought classes together and made access to learning easier for all kids, but especially for the kids who needed those breaks, physically needed those breaks, and they needed the regulation that came with those breaks. But what I found out is that all kids like that. All kids like to learn for 20 minutes and then get a chance to reflect, because you know what? Memory gets better when you do that. There just became a lot of reasons to do what we were doing, and it was good for all kids. And then I started to try to, my teacher artist came out in me and said, I'm going to use music and movement and rhythmic practice to actually gain content. And I started using more rhythm and movement to learn vocabulary, for instance. Became a huge part of my class. Yeah. Those were adjustments I was making on, kind of on the fly. But what I found out, it was good for all kids. So I didn't always have to put kids in different groups. I didn't always have to do a whole differentiated lesson. Yeah. I was able to kind of layer lessons to fit all the kids, but keep us together most of the time. And nobody had to feel ashamed of their level. We just all worked at the level that we knew was there.
Well, and I sometimes hear from people, like a lot of times, like when I'm with this kid individually, he's super smart, he's so intelligent, but man, when he's in class, he's not performing and he's just not trying, or he's not doing all these efforts. And it's kind of like, well, you might want to pay attention to kind of the context of the environment, or what might be going on for this kid's brain when you're with 24 other kids and in a different type of situation, where that rhythm and regulation, where you can kind of get that brain to settle down, so it can be as intelligent as it is, like that these kids can perform even better if they're well regulated.
Yeah, certainly. And that's the other mantra you and I hear all the time from this model is regulate, relate, and reason. That's an order that we are really respectful of, but it makes sense, right? We have to regulate those lower parts of the brain in order to have access to even the relational and the thinking part of the brain. So doing things in a sequence made a lot of sense. And so we got permission to do it. We got permission to do the regulating piece. Didn't take a lot of minutes. It really didn't, as I've already shared, it really didn't affect how much academics we were able to learn. I think it did, though, make us more efficient. Yeah. And I can't think of a teacher that doesn't want to be more efficient. None of us as teachers want to teach to brains that can't receive what we're giving. Mm-hmm. That's totally a waste of our time. And our energy. So we want to make sure that the garden is ready for the seeds to be planted, right? So we prepare, we regulate. And then it's all done in this relational context where the kids know we really care about them, and then the good stuff happens. Mm-hmm. And we all want that. We all want learning. That's what we want.
Right. What did you find? I mean, I know you kind of saw the results of being able to get that content out and kids learning better. I'm sure they performed better. What did those regulation breaks and movement breaks and rhythm and incorporating all that stuff do for behavior?
10 times better. I mean, it was getting ahead of it. Mm-hmm. And no, I know every school is different and every group of kids is different. So I can't say that comparing all kids to my kids is even fair. But I'll just say this. I had just rare trouble because they love the deal. Like, I said, we're going to work for, just an example. We're going to work for 20 minutes. And that was kind of a typical 15 to 20 minutes was my time. Yeah. And then I really need your full attention. And then we're gonna take a walk. Right. But when we come back from that walk, which by the way is timed, practiced, this is not a reward, not a consequence. It is part of the deal. Right. And we would take that walk, and then but when we come back from the walk, we need to get back to it, right? We're okay with that? And they were mature enough to say, we love these breaks. We love kind of the way this game has kind of changed for us, and we're going to respect it. And so I really didn't have trouble that way. I know a lot of people say, if I would take them on a walk, I'd never settle them back down. Place, yeah. I got a kick out of a guy we interviewed not too long ago who said 2 minutes of breathing will save you 20 minutes of hell. If you do breathing at the beginning of class, it doesn't even have to be fancy. If you just let kids get their breath and get relaxed, it'll save you all kinds of trouble in the end. And I felt like that's a pretty true statement. Right. Yeah. Do it up front.
If you had the opportunity to do something that is going to help kids be more focused, more engaged, and less challenging in terms of behavior, would you do it? But sometimes that's not always that people have to be kind of open for that idea of, I gotta do something differently. Have you found, just like students trying to learn, adults have to learn, and we learn slower because of our, the old dog, new tricks kind of thing. But is there something you see of like, because I think kind of what you said with Dr. Perry saying, you're probably going to see an increase, when kids are getting this novelty of doing things differently. They're going to kind of be, how do you help people kind of transform or do that change? Because, oftentimes we're getting an audience of teacher at a point where they're like, we really need help. Like we need, but then there's a lot of that kind of DNA of this kind of operant approach to working with people, consequence oriented, or just a kind of the developmentally insensitive approach. Making that change, making that leap of faith that, you know, it's going to be uncomfortable in the beginning, but it's going to start to kind of level out, and we'll be reaping the rewards.
Yeah, I was going to remind you, Doug, there's one question you didn't ask me.
Okay.
You didn't ask me, what do those breaks, walks, yoga, you didn't ask, what do they do for you, Steve?
So answer yourself your question. That's a great question.
So that's where I find it the most easy to convince teachers of the efficacy of doing something like this is how it affected me. I found out I needed those walks. I needed to do some stretching. I needed to do some deeper breathing. I needed to do some tapping. I needed to turn off the lights, turn on quiet music, and have a mindful 5 minutes at the end of class. Of course, it was good for the kids once they learned to do it. And by the way, I had to teach that. That was not something that was normal, as you just hinted. It was not normal for them, and it was not normal for me either. But when I started doing it, I was so refreshed by it. I was a better teacher. And even in that really hard year in a makeshift school, I still was a better teacher because of it. So I convince staff members to say, hey, regulation is not just for kids. It's for staff as well. And all of us are better served by doing it. And that's my kind of argument to the adult in the room is, you got to learn it too. It's different, it's foreign, but it actually comes pretty natural once we do it, because I think as humans, it's naturally how we work.
Did those doing regulatory activities with the kids, did that also help improve your connection with the kids?
I think without a doubt. Kids really see you as a human being. They see you as someone who can have fun. They see you as someone who's willing to, go outside and walk with them for a few minutes and have a chat. It humanizes you in a way that maybe a few other things can do. And it doesn't leave you, you're still the authority in the classroom. You're still in charge. You don't lose that. I mean, I understand the importance of that, but it's not like you're becoming their best buddy. It's not any of that. It's that you're participating in a really wise thing.
Yeah. And
it makes sense. And we all understood the biology of it. So, it made sense to do it together. But it engendered community, and that's what we were looking for.
And I would assume that it increased attunement. Like, it's kind of like, I think about when we talk about robotic compliance with kids, it's like robotic teaching. We're just going through the lesson plan and trying to get through the lesson plan as it's written, and making it really challenging to be flexible to kind of see what those kids need in that moment, recognizing, okay, I'm not getting anywhere, I need to change it up, or I need to kind of, a lot of times you have a structure, you have a plan for the day, but crisis is not by appointment. So you get you get things that make you have to kind of be flexible in that, okay, I'm going to have to push this academic content maybe to the next day, because right now these kids need this. Attunement is really I think the key word is we're attuned to them and to ourselves probably first. I'm attuned to what I can do and handle and what I need, but also what the kids need, so that I can provide the right intervention at the right time to get the right result. And I think that's the biggest thing.
Exactly. As educators, we have to be expert at reading the room. And reading the room is a lot easier when you have a neurobiological understanding of what's going on in the room.
Yeah.
And within even myself. But it became actually it became kind of adventurous. Do I dare say that? Once I started learning this model, and I thought, this is a whole new way of seeing. And I am really enjoying this journey that I'm on of learning. And I didn't feel like I had to get there fast. I just had to keep growing and learning and understanding kind of how the brain works and what we can do to make everything more efficient and positive and loving and all the goodness that we can think of. And yeah, that's where I love that adventure. And I still think of it as a journey. I get a little worried that schools in this whole trauma-informed approach that is out there everywhere now will just think of it as a check the box, do a PD and call it good. And rather than seeing this is quite a journey. I mean, I've done it for over 10 years. I feel like I've come not that far, but I'm satisfied with where I am, but I'm not satisfied that I've not gone far enough. I haven't learned enough. I don't think we'll ever learn enough about the brain and how it works. So you got to have journey mentality. There's no other way about it.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I always think about that like I go to a training and I hear that movement is really good for the body, and so then I just schedule, I did a go noodle for 15 minutes on Tuesday, so that I'm incorporating movement into my classroom, but there's no rhyme or reason or strategic approach to that, or why am I using it now versus another time. Same thing with the trauma-informed approach. Or even I had a lady, Signa Whitson, who's an expert in bullying and working with bullies or bully prevention and all that, and I said I kind of made that point. It's like it's more than just putting up signs on your walls that no bullying or strong character. It's got to be in the we got to be more than just on autopilot. We have to be thoughtful in what we're doing each day. So I almost think even incorporating those regulatory breaks allows us to be better at being mindful of what kids need in that moment at that time, so that we can recognize what's good for them but use it in the right way. Because I find that oftentimes it'd be like, well, I tried movement and it didn't work, or or I did this, or we had this conversation and then he went and did it again, and we're just not kind of thinking about kind of why we need to do things and when do we need to do
things. And Doug, I think that happens when we put the how ahead of, we put the what to do, maybe, let me say it this way, we put the what to do ahead of how to see. So the first step for anyone in doing anything, I think, that is neurodevelopmentally informed is to do the learning, and to be able to see kids through this lens of neurodevelopment and how stress affects neurodevelopment. That lens has to come first. And I preach it all the time. You're probably tired of me saying it. You probably heard it too many times. But because if we lead with what to do, we don't really know why we're doing it. We just heard someone did it and it worked.
Right.
That will always, the first time that something doesn't work, we'll just kick it to the curb like we've done everything else. This is different. And this is listen, we're going to learn how to see and understand kids, and then we as teachers are going to be the best creators of interventions ever.
Yeah.
It's not like we're going to have to go read somebody else's book. We will be able to, educators, you can figure it out. Once you understand how the brain is organized, how it's working, you will create some wonderful interventions maybe we didn't even think about. Right. Not a 15-minute go noodle on Tuesday. I mean, I love your example because there's nothing wrong with a 15-minute go noodle on Tuesday if it's followed up with maybe a 5-minute something on Wednesday. Right, and right. It's attached to everything we do, and it's attached to our understanding. And if it goes badly, we don't throw it out. We just look at what could I have done better and what would have been more kind of sensitive in this moment. So again, it's that journey. It's the journey mentality, and let's first see how to see on our journey, and then we'll start to know, some of those tricks of the trade that can work. That's an important sequence for us, I think.
Well, and I always, one of my favorite slides, and I don't know how you interpret or internalize the slide that we use in the neurosequential model we train, but the slide where it says essentially all models are wrong, some are useful. I kind of see it, and just kind of in the way that you're explaining it is the cookie cutter approach is very ineffective for a majority of the kids because we're not being attuned to what those kids need, or we're just implementing it. We're very manualized, and we're not using our critical thinking or our awareness of what is going on in the environment to implement the model. Now, there's nothing wrong with these models. It's, are we using it in the way it should be used based on the biological or neurobiological needs of each of the students and you as a teacher? Like, are you know, sometimes it's not good for us to be teaching a content because we're just in a bad place and we need to do something to kind of correct that. So then, you know, do we fault the model, or do we fault the use of the model or the way we, you know, try to use it? So I always like that kind of quote because we're so high on evidence-based curriculums and evidence-based practice, but if we don't really try to get the knowledge internalized and then be able to implement it, then I think we're gonna kind of have those experiences where it didn't work. Because, you know, it's like the, schools and even in other, there's a new curriculum every so many years. There's a new PBIS approach every so many years. We're always trying new things, and we never really kind of understand them or get to a place where we actually see the benefits of them.
Right. And I think what I love about the neurosequential model, it's my frame.
Yeah.
But inside that frame is my freedom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I love that. And I was a stubborn teacher that way. I didn't want anyone tell me what to do.
Right.
I wanted to create my own business, right? So, but I needed the frame. And I, you know, full circle, going back to the first time I went to hear Dr. Perry speak a full day of training. What I thought I walked out of there was with a new pair of glasses.
Yeah.
I had never worn these glasses before. And that was the game changer. But I didn't expect anyone to necessarily hand me a box curriculum called NME, because NME is not a curriculum. Mm-hmm. It is a way of seeing leading to a way of doing. And that's how I like to talk about it. That's how I like to share it. And I think that's what's real.
Well, and I think, so I had this conversation. I'm scheduled to do a training in a month with a school district about a restorative practice. And they were talking about the teachers really wanting the how-to and all that type of thing. But I said, I don't want people to underestimate the value of the model, because if you give a how-to model to an incorrect mindset or a non-restorative practice mindset, then the restorative practice implementation is not going to go well. So, you know, theory or the mindset is really is a really huge percentage of implementation. It's, you know, I find it's like 75% the mindset, 25% the actual carrying out of a model. Because if you don't have the mindset, then your ability to implement the model goes out the window. If I don't buy into the model or buy into the theory behind the model, then but I'm doing it because that's what my school is telling me to do, or that's what my supervisor is telling me what to do, then it comes out. And then it's almost that self-fulfilling prophecy of, see, it didn't work. As why don't, you know, I just need to go back to my way of doing things. And, you know, because we never really grounded the mindset. So I'm like, no, I need to start with the mindset of restorative practice, because you're already telling me that there's maybe some teachers that aren't really sure about this approach or why to do it. And so we have to kind of really ground that. And I think, you know, ground in the knowledge of the neurosequential model and all those things, anything you're trying to implement. Do you have a good understanding of the model and why you're doing it, and, you know, all those things.
And then, you know, and then not only restorative justice, which I love, but many things you educators are already doing in school will make sense.
Right.
And the things they're doing that are working well will make sense. Mm-hmm. Especially once they understand kind of the neurobiology of learning and teaching and human relationships. It will all a lot of things we're already doing, we'll get the why. And I hear that all the time. I'm sure you do too. I just needed to know the why. And now that I do, it makes sense. And sometimes the why tells us why something isn't working.
Sure.
Or why it isn't working now, but it worked yesterday. Wait a second. How did that happen? Well, it depends on the state of being of the people you're working with. So it all kind of comes together and makes sense. And it allows for that freedom and creativity that I think all educators should value. I hope you do. And say, I want to be a creative teacher, but I want it framed by an understanding that kind of leads me and guides me.
Yeah. Well, I know that there's a million more things that we could talk about, and I've already taken up a really large amount of your time, so I do appreciate you jumping on with me and having this conversation about neurodevelopment, education, all sorts of things.
I could never say no to you. So that's
what would be kind of a walk away in terms of the neurosequential model that you would want people to kind of know, of like maybe just an insight about it, or maybe your favorite kind of mantra or kernel that you take from it that you think is maybe either helpful for people to kind of know firsthand about, or before they even explore it further, or just a kind of going away present related to the neurosequential model.
Oh man, I'm going to be repetitive, but I really go back to the importance of I got a new way of seeing, and I had to lead with that. It was the most important aspect for me was understanding kind of just a couple core concepts. It doesn't have to be complicated, of how kind of understanding how this brain works and how it responds to stress and how it learns. Once I had those glasses on, it was life-changing for me. Not just at a school level though, as a dad, as a grandpa, as just a person. It was life-enhancing, but it had to start with how to see.
Yeah.
That was clearly the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for your time, and I appreciate all your wisdom and bringing it to our audience. So thank you.
Thank you. A great opportunity, and blessings for you and the audience. Everybody, make it the best we can. This is a tough year. I acknowledge that, but we'll make it the best we can. We're going to learn from this. We're not going to waste our suffering, Doug.
That's a great way to end. All right. Thank you. Based on the biological or neurobiological needs of each of the students and you as a teacher. Like, are you sometimes it's not good for us to be teaching a content because we're just in a bad place and we need to do something to kind of correct that. So then, do we fault the model, or do we fault the use of the model, or the way we, try to use it? So I always like that kind of quote, because we're so high on evidence-based curriculums and evidence-based practice, but if we don't really try to get the knowledge internalized and then be able to implement it, then I think we're gonna kind of have those experiences where it didn't work. Because it's like the schools and even in other, there's a new curriculum every so many years. There's a new PBIS approach every so many years. We're always trying new things, and we never really kind of understand them or get to a place where we actually see the benefits of them.
Right. And I think what I love about the neurosequential model, it's my frame.
Yeah.
But inside that frame is my freedom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I love that. And I was a stubborn teacher that way. I didn't want anyone to tell me what to do.
Right.
I wanted to create my own business, right? So, but I needed the frame. And I, it's full circle, going back to the first time I went to hear Dr. Perry speak a full day of training. What I thought I walked out of there was with a new pair of glasses.
Yeah.
I had never worn these glasses before. And that was the game changer. But I didn't expect anyone to necessarily hand me a box curriculum called NME, because NME is not a curriculum. It is a way of seeing leading to a way of doing. And that's how I like to talk about it. That's how I like to share it. And I think that's what's real.
Well, and I think, so I had this conversation. I'm scheduled to do a training in a month with a school district about a restorative practice. And they were talking about the teachers really wanting the how-to and all that type of thing. But I said, I don't want people to underestimate the value of the model, because if you give a how-to model to an incorrect mindset or a non-restorative practice mindset, then the restorative practice implementation is not going to go well. So, theory or the mindset is really is a really huge percentage of implementation. It's, I find it's like 75% the mindset, 25% the actual carrying out of the model. Because if you don't have the mindset, then your ability to implement the model goes out the window. If I don't buy into the model or buy into the theory behind the model, but I'm doing it because that's what my school is telling me to do, or that's what my supervisor is telling me what to do, then it comes out. And then it's almost that self-fulfilling prophecy of, see, it didn't work. As why don't, I just need to go back to my way of doing things. And because we never really grounded the mindset. So I'm like, no, I need to start with the mindset of restorative practice, because you're already telling me that there's maybe some teachers that aren't really sure about this approach or why to do it. And so we have to kind of really ground that. And I think, ground in the knowledge of the neurosequential model and all those things, anything you're trying to implement. Do you have a good understanding of the model and why you're doing it, and, all those things?
And then, not only restorative justice, which I love, but many things you educators are already doing in school will make sense.
Right.
And the things they're doing that are working well will make sense. Mm-hmm. Especially once they understand kind of the neurobiology of learning and teaching and human relationships. It will a lot of things we're already doing will get the why. And I hear that all the time. I'm sure you do too. I just needed to know the why. And now that I do, it makes sense. And sometimes the why tells us why something isn't working.
True.
Or why it isn't working now, but it worked yesterday. Wait a second. How did that happen? Well, it depends on the state of being of the people you're working with. So it all kind of comes together and makes sense. Mm-hmm. And it allows for that freedom and creativity that I think all educators should value. I hope you do. And say, I want to be a creative teacher, but I want it framed by an understanding that kind of leads me and guides me.
Yeah. Well, I know that there's a million more things that we could talk about, and I've already taken up a really large amount of your time, so I do appreciate you jumping on with me and having this conversation about neurodevelopment, education, all sorts of things.
I could never say no to you. So that's
what would be kind of a walk away in terms of the neurosequential model that you would want people to kind of know, of like maybe just an insight about it, or what, or maybe your favorite kind of mantra or kernel that you take from it that you think is maybe either helpful for people to kind of know firsthand about, or before they even explore it further, or just a kind of going away present related to the neurosequential model.
Oh man, I'm going to be repetitive, but I really go back to the importance of, I got a new way of seeing. Mm-hmm. And I had to lead with that. It was the most important aspect for me was understanding kind of just a couple core concepts. It doesn't have to be complicated, of how kind of understanding how this brain works and how it responds to stress and how it learns. Once I had those glasses on, it was life-changing for me. Not just at a school level though, as a dad, as a grandpa, as just a person. It was life-enhancing, but it had to start with how to see.
Yeah.
That was clearly the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for your time, and I appreciate all your wisdom and bringing it to our audience. So thank you.
Well, thank you. A great opportunity, and blessings for you and the audience. Everybody, make it the best we can. This is a tough year. I acknowledge that, but we'll make it the best we can. We're going to learn from this. We're not going to waste our suffering, Doug.
That's a great way to end. Great way to end. All right. Thank you.